So I don't know how many conferences you all attend, but I can't tell you the last time I had an outdoor lunch. It was that yummy. I mean, Asian, not make your own sandwich or anything like that, or potato chips. That was pretty excellent. So I'm excited to be here, and today we're going to talk about transforming your organizations into a social business, and we'll talk a little bit about Marsh. And this is, I like Phoenix a whole lot, and I was glad to come here. I think this is the 6th city I've been to in the last 2 weeks, so it's nice to be somewhere warm. So a little bit about Marsh I'll talk about in just a second, but I did want to acknowledge two of my colleagues, Christian Schaub and Christina Harris, who are here from Marsh as well, from New York, and are my colleagues, and you'll get to meet them tonight at the reception as well. But what I wanted to talk about is Marsh, first of all. Now, nothing says sex like insurance brokerage, right? Marsh is an insurance broker. In fact, one of the largest in the world, and it's a celebrated company with a 141-year-old history. We're about $5 billion revenue company, 24,000 employees in over 100 countries, and we actually are part of the Marsh McLennan Company of families. Some of you may be Mercer customers, and if you are, thank you for your business. We appreciate it. Also, Oliver Wyman Management Consulting and Guy Carpenter Reinsurance Brokerage are a part of the family. In fact, Christian, Christine, and I all actually came from Oliver Wyman. We're all former management consultants. And as a part of our talent programs, we move between the businesses. Now, a little bit about me. In terms of business, I was one of these people, I think, that was just born to be a business person. You know, when I was 8, I remember my favorite store was Office Depot. It wasn't Toys R Us. And in fact, I had a desk in my room, and I had a speaker phone. And I even had one of those receipt invoicing pads with the invoice number and the triplicate. And there's actually a copy we have now. My sister still brings this up to me. And it says, and it says to, and it says, my sister Lauren. And it's written in like ransom note, kind of crazy, sketching kind of looking font. And I think it was 8, and it said rent for borrowing my toys, $5. And it says payment terms, pay me now. And then it says address, my house. And so this was, so that was the start of, I think, my business career. And in fact, I remember my friend Jeff, we were laughing about this. We were like 12, and we'd have business lunches at the Olive Garden. And we would ride our bikes, and we'd have these business lunches. So actually now, whenever we go to our hometown, we'll have a business lunch at the Olive Garden. Now it might include a glass of wine. So, some kids when they're little, they play house. I played Mr. Big. And so that's how I like to do it. So a little bit about me in terms of HR and what I do for Marsh. I run the human capital performance practice, and a lot of the things that were talked about by our speakers this morning are actually very relevant, so I was really engaged this morning about what was being said. So human capital strategy, I think David talked about the notion of business strategy and human capital strategies coming together. Workforce analytics and planning, kind of the math and the science behind HR and planning for the future. Culture and values, colleague engagement, as well as social media and social learning. So that's the portfolio of things that I work on, Christian, Christine, and our other colleagues work on at Marsh. Now, I don't know how many of you are tweeting. I tweeted this morning. We won't have a ton of tweeters at this conference, but if you do tweet, that's okay. We like that. And I'll know if you're on your mobile device, you're tweeting. So, but this is our Twitter handles for myself, for Marsh U, which we'll talk about. Red Rover is actually the technology company. They're a New York-based Silicon Alley high-growth company, pretty cool company that powers all of our social media at the firm internally. Definitely want to check out Red Rover HQ or redroverhq.com. And then Marsh, my firm, as well as marshuniversity.com, is actually available to the public to see a little peek about what that looks like. So let's talk about a declaration. And if we think about a lot of business plans and how things come about at our companies, very rarely do a leader or a group of leaders come out and make a very bold statement that's something that's going to get done. But actually at Marsh, that's exactly what happened and really made a huge difference for us as we look to transform to be a much more social business, and I'll talk about what that means. But for a little context and a little history, because remember, Marsh is a 141-year-old company. We're not exactly a spring chick. But if you looked at the 2000s, on 9/11, almost 10% of the people that died were Marsh employees. And we had some trouble with the Attorney General of the state of New York. We ended up losing, paying a couple $100 million fine, losing almost $1 billion in business, fired tens of thousands of employees, went through some very rigorous expense management controls. We had kind of a perk-rich environment that quickly became a perk-poor environment. And then 2 CEO leadership regime changes, and then something called the Great Recession happened after all of that. So that was the 2000s, not exactly a party at Marsh. And so, and really, oftentimes, referred to as the dark years. In fact, we had a consulting firm come in and did some interviews of our senior leaders as we were kind of changing our business strategy. And one of the quotes was, "I'm still mopping up the blood from firing all of my friends." Does that give you a sense of the sentiment of our company? I don't know if you can relate to this with your firms, but we haven't been Facebook and Google and explosive growth and foosball tables and beanbags and beer carts, okay? And so we are a older, more conservative, risk-averse firm. It might relate to your company. So that was the 2000s. Then I come along. I'm like, let's grow and let's have fun and let's be social and let's innovate and collaborate and all those things. Well, it really started with a declaration. And you probably should put on your must-read list a book called The 3 Laws of Performance by Steve Zaffron. In June of '09, I was in Guatemala on vacation eating avocados. That's where avocados are from. Originally, they call the Guatemalans the green bellies. And I was like drunk on avocados. And I was reading this great book called The 3 Laws of Performance. And it was all about how organizations are a network of conversations. And that leaders had to say what that conversation was, and that they could use what was called future-based generative language. Well, I was pretty compelled by it, and at the time I was actually working for Marsh & McLennan companies. And in fact, actually, the story about how I got into HR. You guys are all HR professionals, probably been in the field a long time, know a lot more about it than I did at this point. And in fact, I was in consulting, and the market obviously was down because of the recession. And we'd all signed up to take these programs to take some time off so we could avoid layoffs. And so I had this really great idea in 2008. I signed up a year in advance, and I said, I know all these people at this company called Citibank. I thought, that's a place I should go when my time off. Well, by the time 2009 came around, all those people had been fired from Citibank. I had no plan B and was kind of desperate to find something to do for a couple months to keep the cash coming in. Well, I'd solicited our head of HR at corporate, and I said, I would love to get a rotation, maybe doing some diversity work for 3 months or something like that. And he was very encouraged, and he had me come to his office, and he said, I have a counter proposal. Instead of diversity for 3 months, I'd love you to help me run talent management for me for more like a year. So I smartly did 2 things. I confidently said yes, and then I left the room to Google talent management to decide what the heck I had just signed up for, because I had no idea. So that's actually how I got into HR. So it was a pretty humble beginnings. But we actually brought in Steve Zaffron and this organization, and we created a declaration. I think what's most interesting here is this is from the senior leadership team. And they declared the possibility of making Marsh a great place to work for outstanding people. And 2 really important dimensions, place and people. We often focus on the people part. We just got to hire the right people. We've got to retain the right people. We've got to train the right people. We've got to engage the right people. But the place, no one really talks about the air in the room, right? The context. And so we were looking at managing both. I was really surprised. I was actually at we were on Glen Cove, Long Island when this got created. I was expecting the leadership team to come out and say, we declare the possibility of having the biggest market share, being the best insurance broker. That wasn't it. It was about our people, which really surprised me. And this notion around Marsh University came up. And then our colleague engagement survey said that career development was the most important driver of colleague engagement. And oh, by the way, we did a really bad job at that. I don't know if you can relate to that. And so that was something that came up, and they said, we're going to declare to create this Marsh University. And the notion of committing to provide great tools and enable outstanding performance. These are all declarations. We hadn't done anything. There was no work. There was no plans. It was just these high-level proclamations. And this wasn't a secret. We told the whole firm. So really put our butts on the line. And I know that's a behavior that a lot of leaders don't want to take or do, is to make or commit to something, because they think they have to manage the expectations and whatever. But actually what happens is you create this whole future, and the whole company begins to pull for it. So HR is going to be really involved in this, right? Because these are very people-centric sort of things. But I think the problem with HR, whether it's at Marsh or a lot of other organizations, because I talk with and communicate with and network with a lot of different organizations, that I think the heritage of HR has been around managing the rotten apples. It's been a very kind of personnel management, employee relations, and all those things are important, right? But it's a very different paradigm shift to think of growing an orchard of apples, of healthy apples, and that's really where I think the role of HR is going. And it's really actually not, the rotten apples, just get them out of the firm, right? Goodbye, see ya. It's all about, focusing on the 99% of your colleagues who probably do want to be there, who probably are really good people, who want to make a difference, but might need a little help and support in doing so. So this was a big shift for the HR function at almost any company, but in particular Marsh, which, by the way, we had cut in half in 2007 in a 6-week period of time. And in a little context, as you look at some of the work we've done, Marsh's HR spend per capita, which I think is the best measure, because if you get into headcount ratios and you have outsourcing, it's kind of hard to measure it all. Our HR spend per capita is in the lower 25th percentile, according to Saratoga benchmarks. So we are not generous in HR spend, but we are highly effective in how we use that money. So one of the things that came out in the colleague engagement survey is that recognition was a problem. We need to recognize more. People didn't feel appreciated around recognition. So we smartly said, let's go create a recognition program. But we looked really quickly to see if we had any already at the firm. We actually found we had 56 recognition programs. So the problem was not a recognition program. The problem was we didn't have a consistent definition of what we valued as a firm. In fact, we had these operating principles before. We asked some of our senior executives to kind of recite them. Well, they only got about half of them because they were so long and kind of these platitudes that weren't commonly understood. So we actually created Ignite. And it's pretty interesting because it was very thoughtful about how this came to be. But when Ignite was created, it was really, things like Nimble is around organizational agility. Agility doesn't sound very sexy or cool, so we called it Nimble. It's kind of fun, right? And things, in the genuine and the candor or in touch, kind of being transparent and inclusive in that regard. But the trusted is really interesting because these aren't necessarily new things. In fact, Doug, the former CEO of Campbell Soup, told me today that in 1938, his wife's grandfather was an insurance broker at Marsh. And he went into Ford Motor Company. Henry Ford had just stepped down as a CEO. He went to the new CEO. This is his wife's grandfather. And I heard the story just this morning. And he went and pitched him a group policy and walked away. And the guy said yes right away. And he quoted him a $150 million price tag in 1938 dollars. Well, the guy goes back to the office and then realizes he had totally screwed up the numbers. So he goes back to the CEO the next day and says, hey, I want to let you know, I misquoted that. I wasn't prepared. I thought we were just going to start a conversation. It went so well. I understand if you don't want to do business with me. Well, the CEO of Ford at the time said to him, no, I definitely want to do business with you because now I know I can trust you. So it kind of ties to that trust theme. And so that's, again, we're a trusted advisor, especially in the risk business. Sometimes clients at their worst moments are really reliant on our business and what we do for them, especially in the claims space. So this is a really important part of our culture. One of the things to get our leadership immersed with our culture, and again, the culture is all going to tie to the social piece, but really the social piece is an architecture that helps to enable and enliven what your culture is we did something called game storming. So we actually had taught our executives, insurance brokers, remember, to draw. And they drew in kind of their expression of what Ignite meant to them. They came together, they combined their drawings, then artists professionally rendered them. And they came out with something pretty cool, I think. This really was kind of the vision of a lot of our senior leaders. We did a little polishing. I think the Nimble one at one point was like two guys throwing a woman or something, and the HR guy and me said, no. So we polished those up just a little bit, but in general, that was the kind of their expression of kind of what Ignite meant to us. So that was the declaration, right? That was our firm coming out of the dark years and declaring we're going to be a great place to work for outstanding people. We're going to create a Marsh University, provide great tools to enable outstanding performance. And oh, by the way, we have this culture called Ignite that we're defining, and that's the future state. We're a global company, 100 countries, 400 offices. How do we get, if you think of strategy execution, aligned behaviors accelerate the strategy. So we want everyone rowing in the same direction. That's the foundation. Well, demonstration. So how many of you know anything about change management? So there's a lot of different views of change management. There's some people that are much more sophisticated than I am that could explain it. I've got a really simple model for you. So if you think about change management, people are all over the spectrum. And so when you think about things like social media, they're on this spectrum as well. But there are things, I'd be hard-pressed to find anyone in this audience who hasn't used their cell phone today or sent an email. But 10 years ago, that was a very different behavior, and people were at different places about that. So wherever people are on this spectrum is okay. Now, this is my very scientific plotting of where we might be, at least within the United States, about some of these technologies, Facebook and Twitter and even geolocation. Nanobots, if I told you what those were, it would just piss you off. So now, does anyone know what these are? Flares, right? So this is how my mom used her cell phone. Okay, so she's got this cell phone, and it's in her glove box and has enough charge for probably a 3-minute call. I remember I tried to text her once, and I got a response 3 weeks later that was a why, but I asked an open-ended question, so I'm not sure what that meant. So this is how my mom had used her cell phone. Well, then she got this new, really cool device one day from her son called an iPhone. Well, she went crazy. So she now would text me in all emoticons. In fact, let me speak Sioux for you, okay? This is, Mom and Dad are getting coffee and a bite to eat at the airport. It's a great day to fly. Look forward to seeing you for dinner and drinks tonight. That's a real text message from my mom. Now, this is my mom who barely used a cell phone is now texting me in all emoticons, okay? But it was compelling, it was easy, and it solved a real problem. So as we think about these things, you might think related to social technologies, oh, our people won't do it, or we have an older workforce, all these things. It's not necessarily true when you have the right interface. But really, if you look at the objective, and I think that Peter talked about it this morning, he drew that diagram with the 5 verticals, and he talked about the cracks in between. It's really about burning off the fog is kind of like addressing the cracks. Anyone recognize this bridge? Golden Gate? Yep, exactly. So San Francisco is this world-class city below it. If you've ever flown into San Francisco, there's a lot of fog in the morning, and you might not realize there's this world-class city. Well, sometimes from some executive suites, this is kind of what the organization looks like. There's this big fog. So we need to go do training or learning or leadership development. Well, what do? We go outside. We got to bring in outside consultants and resources and content, et cetera. Yet below, if you burn off the fog, there's actually a lot there, a lot to work with. And that's those cracks. You just can't see. It's not always visible. So what is Marsh U? Well, Marsh U is definitely not a university. We inherited the declaration, so we kind of ran with the name, kind of call it Marsh U now. What it is about knowledge sharing and institutionalization of knowledge. In fact, our people in our business are known as the brains in risk management. And so the problem is the best of Marsh is usually in one of two places, either in the gray matter of their heads or it's on their hard drives, which isn't very helpful if you're in one of the other 399 offices. That person isn't. And so it's really about institutionalizing that knowledge. Relationship development. If I'm going to cross-sell business to my client, I've got this book of business, I don't want to bring in another broker and have them screw up my relationship with my client. I want to protect that book. So there's a lot of need to have people be comfortable and familiar with their own colleagues. It might sound kind of crazy introducing colleagues to one another. We're 25,000 people. It's what needs to happen. Capability awareness. I mean, we do a wide variety of things for our clients. Not everyone knows. In fact, we talked earlier, someone talked about the notion of the career ladder is often straight up. People will know their one domain, but they don't know the other 165 capabilities that we have. It is also about collaboration and fun. So our principles. If I could have you remember one thing from this presentation and tattoo it into your brain, it's this. At Marsh, everyone's a teacher. And that's what we started with. In fact, when we launched, everyone was expecting to kind of, how mama bird chews up the worm and spits it in baby bird's mouth. You ever seen birds get fed? That's what everyone was kind of expecting from a learning model. That's not, we looked at it and we kind of turned it around and said, actually, everyone's going to teach because that's the best retention. And in fact, we have all these resources and these great people. So at Marsh, everyone's a teacher, and I mean everyone. So administrative assistants have a lot to share. In fact, they actually kind of run about half the company, if you haven't realized, and they can get a lot done for you when you're really nice and respectful to them. But they know all sorts of systems and shortcuts and the way things happen, and they really get a lot of things done. So it's not just managing directors or senior vice presidents, it's everyone has some contribution to add. Now, one of the things we talked about, old models not fitting the new economy, where things are going. So what's important about Marsh U is it's very informal, and it doesn't have as much structure around it. Because sometimes if you compartmentalize and categorize too much, you don't allow the space for innovation. You have those cracks, you almost need a little bit of a green field, and that's what a lot of it's about, more emergent, less structured. It's also atomized. So if you think of traditional training and formal learning, oftentimes the people that have time to go to a week-long training course are often your worst performers. Your best performers are out servicing clients and selling. Your worst performers are like, sure, I'll take a week-long boondoggle to the training center, right? And they're not necessarily, so your internal rate of return on investing in your lowest performers isn't very good. In fact, I look at myself, hour-long webinar. How many of you put an hour-long webinar on your calendar and completely blow it off, right? It happens all the time. And so an hour is a lot to ask, let alone a day or a week. So atomize, we look at 5 minutes or less for the learning or for the knowledge. Something very small that can be digestible in someone's daily workflow. There's hardly anybody that can't find 5 minutes a day. Rather than learning being an event, you get smarter by working at Marsh every day. And then finally, social. If you look at world-class universities or other environments, the professors at Harvard or Stanford don't do most of the talking. The whole classroom does. Actually, the rooms are architected often in half circles because it's all about interacting with each other. The admissions groups there, they don't really look at how good of a student you're going to be. They really look at how good of a teacher. What kind of experience do you have? What profile? That's why the best universities look at what industries you're from, how old you are, what you've seen, where you've worked, because they're looking more for what you're going to contribute to the classroom than what you're going to take. We look at it the same way. So social, just think of it as 3 or more people learning together, out loud, having a conversation. And the promise to our colleagues is, they can be more at Marsh. And more has many expressions and dimensions, but a lot of it really comes from the notion of being first. A lot of times people think you have to have, do, to be. I got to have my ducks in a row to do the things I got to do to be the person I'm going to be. Well, we start kind of with the being of it, to do the things you need to do, to have the things you want to have. So people want to move up, they want to get more responsibility, they want to make more money, they want to learn more. A lot of it's going to be from declaring kind of who they're being at the start of that. So that's kind of our vision and principles around Marsh U. Very important, make it fun. Making something required, I highly advise you not do that. Putting it in balanced scorecards, not a good plan. No one makes Facebook required, yet somehow 25% of the internet traffic in the United States is Facebook. but no one's required to be on Facebook. Well, why is that? Well, it's compelling and it's fun and it meets needs. So one of the things when we launched Marsh U, we actually launched with a petition. And we actually asked colleagues, what do they want to teach? And we had 7 times the response rate that we thought we would have. And then we did things like a photo contest. All of our blogs are anchored with a beautiful photo. It's like when we had a new CEO, we had a picture of soil, and there's this like seed germinating through it. It kind of perfectly captured the moment on his second day of work. And so what we did is we burned off the fog, and we sourced pictures internally. Well, in fact, it ended up being a cost savings. We had 700 submissions, over 30,000 votes, and we gave away Marsh U flip cams so people can create video blogs. But the flip cams cost less than I was paying for the stock images, so hugely engaging, and yet it saved money. And in fact, I was in Atlanta at HCI's workforce planning event a couple weeks ago, and I asked a question, and some woman runs up to me at break, and she goes, "You're with Marsh?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Do you know about Marsh U?" I said, "Well, yeah, I do." And she said, "Well, you remember the photo contest?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Remember the picture of the boats in Venice?" She goes, "That was mine. I won. I still have the flip cam." And she actually didn't even work for our firm anymore, but it was one of the most positive experiences she had about our firm was a photo contest. So making things fun and compelling is a much higher bar and kind of different than I think a lot of traditional kind of rotten apple HRs thought. But I think when you think about the orchard side of it, I think it's a much more compelling professional challenge to have. One of our secret weapons is we have 40 plus, and this is just a select group, of ambassadors. These are folks that are in the business. Very few are in HR or marketing or communications. They're in the business. They're brokers. They're in places like Sydney and Santiago and Sao Paulo and Istanbul and London and, and Sacramento and everywhere in between. And they are folks that dedicate their time off the side of their desk to making Marsh U work in their geography. And if any of you work for multinational firms, you know that one-size-fits-all stuff rolled out of the corporate office doesn't go over so hot. And so people are different. So one day I was in London last year, and we did a photo day, and we did tea and cakes. The same day in Mexico City, they were doing the same thing, but they had like backpacks and music, and it was completely different. It totally worked in both places, but you had to have that kind of flexibility. So these are folks that in France, it is very different than Australia about how people want to share. In fact, there's unique cultural things around teams, or are people boasting, or are they bragging if they blog? In the States, we have a lot less of that concern. In other geographies, we hear a lot more of that. Gosh, if I raise my hand or I'm too visible, people think I'm off task. So these are the kind of people that deal with all the cultural side of those things. Another thing is keep score. And before I kind of talk about this slide, this weekend I was in our nation's capital in DC, and I hosted a little dinner on Saturday for 900 people. And part of the dinner was to raise money. I'm on a nonprofit board, and I'm the chair of development. So this year, our ask that we asked for money at the dinner, and it's military related, we decided to do something different. We were going to take text-based pledges. So we created a chart that looked a lot like this, except the bars were Navy, Air Force, Marines, Army, Coast Guard, and civilian allies. And I'll tell you what, we raised $200,000 in asks on top of almost $400,000 we had sold in tables and tickets. And it was double what we had expected. But we made it a game. And you heard people hooting and hollering and cheering because the thing was real time. And it was dynamic as it was going up there. And I'll tell you what, keeping score and having data totally matters in anything you do in HR these days. If you think of a real business project, you think, head of operations of your company, the head of marketing, the head of finance, they're all coming into the executive table with lots of charts, lots of graphs, lots of data. The head of HR, are they coming in with all of that? Not always, not necessarily. But if you keep score and you have data and you have charts that look like this, people will take you very seriously. So Latin America, you can see, it was 88% of colleagues there have a profile, most of them with a photo. About 4 or 5 months ago, that was 8%. They were laggard, and now they're the leader. Well, what happened? One, we gave them the data. They didn't even know it was an issue. And then their ambassadors took it on to actually make it happen. And Uruguay was our first country. I think Argentina was our second country, and Colombia our third that hit 100% profiles. But that was because the business leaders took it on, and because they were competitive. They said, Latin America, we got 19% growth last year. We're not about to, be last place when it comes to profiles on our social network. So we made it competitive. Again, looking at your addressable market of colleagues, disaggregate, segment. Don't treat everyone the same. Look at where the opportunities are. So if you look at, where this is, profile completeness, sizing by geography, but it doesn't really matter. The idea is disaggregate, be targeted, just like a marketer would. And then in terms of, if you ever heard of the 99-1 model of online communities, a lot of the problem with social media at companies is your senior executives don't know what expectations, they don't have good expectations. It's something new. So you think even like email open rates. You might ask someone, oh, what do you think a good email open rate? They say, oh, 80%. When you tell them it's 20 is benchmark, that 20% of emails are read on average, according to most benchmarks, maybe 30 if they're really effective, 10 if they're not. They say it's a whole different conversation about effective communication at your company. And so this is actually active contributions. So 90% of people are lurkers. They're the kind of people that log onto Facebook. You know who these people are. You might be one of them. You log onto Facebook. You scroll through that activity stream. You look at your friend's photo album. You check out your ex from college, and you see, how they're looking and all that. And then you log off, and you don't do anything else. That's the lurkers. 9% are passive contributors. They're the folks that like everything, right, or write a brief comment on something. And then 1% are active contributors that have edited on their Mac some movie of them dancing in the weekend, having a good time. So, and so bloggers are active contributors, and these are the bloggers at Marsh. In fact, if 1% of online communities are usually bloggers, we actually have 2.88 overall. In the Middle East, we have 5.36%, which is pretty interesting. And when I spoke to some folks from Oman recently, when in the Netherlands, they said, you know what, Ben, there's 25 of us or something in Oman. We all know each other. I'd really like to get my brand out there within the firm, so I'm known for other career opportunities. And the stuff for us to learn isn't out of our own office. It's with other offices. And we're a high growth area. So there was a big, so you can see the Middle East, they're contributing a lot, but they're also gaining a lot. And in fact, these are years of service bands. And without going too much into this chart, if you think of having a profile as kind of step one, I got into the theme park. Number 2, did I read? Did I get on the ride? Number 3, I might have commented or been at the front of that roller coaster, blogging. And so if you look across, it's highly proportional representative across years of service bands, and this is also true for age. So we have a lot of folks that thought, oh gosh, baby boomers will not use this. Can you imagine someone might say something like that? It's actually not true. What we found is that in fact a lot of our older colleagues, our longer service colleagues, baby boomers, have a ton to share. They've been in the workforce 30, 40 years. They have a crap load of experience and tons of insights that they'd love to share. And they actually want to leave a legacy. Someone talked about that this morning, leaving a legacy. So they're like, finally, someone's giving me a voice. Someone's giving me a podium. So they get really excited about it. And one of the other things, you think about a marketer, it's not just what people do, but it's also kind of how they think. So we actually measure in our engagement surveys, which are identified, we measure colleague sentiment around Marsh University being valuable. I could put a great deck together. I can make great slides and tell our executives Marsh is the best thing in the world, but who cares? If the colleagues don't value it and don't use it, we're wasting our time. And so if you look here, Latin America and Asia are more favorable than some of our other parts of the world. In fact, some of our Chinese colleagues even call it Marsh book, since they don't have Facebook there. They think it's the closest thing too. And it's been very, very favorable. But again, you always want to be thinking about how is this positioned within colleagues' minds. Even if we have colleagues that say, I don't really use MarshU, but I'm really glad it's there. Which is kind of option value, right? So it's an interesting way to think about HR initiatives and how we're doing. We have over 2,000 blogs. That's unique content that we didn't have before at the firm, or it was sequestered in some hard drive or in some desk. We won Information Week's Innovation 500 Award for one of the most innovative uses of technology in business. We were featured on Bloomberg TV, and that's all good. But I think what's interesting is you want to think about really being disruptive within your own firm. Much better to disrupt your own firm than have someone else do it to you, right? And HR has that opportunity. And something that in disruption doesn't mean destruction, right? Those are different things. And the Best Buy example about the females and their influence over the consumer electronics buying decision is a great example. Really simple things, changing the bathrooms and the signage and the placards and those sorts of things. Very, very simple things, but simple things can make a huge difference. I mean, think about civil rights in the United States, right? I mean, it was lunch counters and buses, caused a huge change within our country. And sometimes your firm, you might find it's a very small thing that's actually where you're going to start. You might not go for the big kahuna. You might go for a smaller opportunity. Well, I think there's a saying in the South, find an itch to scratch. And so this is about finding that itch. And you want to not go with an HR solution. You want to go to a business problem. And so this is Joe. Joe is an executive at our company. Joe's a great guy. He served our country in the Navy and has been a college professor and an executive in the insurance industry for many, many years. And he's a president of our US-Canada division. Joe had a problem. And I'll tell you what, Joe would get emotional about that, personally upset. What he found was that he would travel around and would talk about financial distinctions, earnings and stock price and those things, and that people largely didn't have as complete of an understanding of that as he would have hoped. And so the problem is we're a financial services company, and so we're selling risk products, and if we don't understand the impact to the CFO and to the finances and the financial statements of our clients of what our products are, that's an issue. Well, he's been frustrated with this for years. He's talked to HR, we've done some things, whatever, but nothing's really kind of cracked the code. So Joe took things into his own hands. And he's a teacher, right? So, but typically you would have kind of two options about how you might teach. Classroom training, online learning, right? So the e-learning. So the problem, at least for a company like ours, is if you were to do classroom training, that would take years. And that could be very expensive. And it could be one of those things that would be cumbersome to employees. You'd have to take them away from sales and clients. Online training would still cost money and kind of be boring, frankly, and generic. So instead, he used social learning and used Marsh. And he actually took this into his own hands, completely led by him. He enrolled a bunch of business executives across the firm to all start blogging in a Making a Financial Impact at Marsh series. Okay, so this is our business leader taking on human capital, taking it into his own hands, using this new technology. So it's highly tailored, highly relevant. Instead of just talking in general terms, we talk specifically about our products and services and the Marsh finances, et cetera. Well, I said keep score, right? Measure everything. We had over 40,000 views, completely discretion, and this was not required, right? This is just, you know, he went, but the thing is, when Joe takes it on, if I want to send an all-colleague email, I have to get in line, right? You talk to the communications group, and you have to wait and get scheduled or whatever. What Joe does is he calls the 5 digits on his speakerphone and says, I want a memo to go out tomorrow. I need to draft in an hour. And guess what? It somehow happens because he's the president of the division. So he became the chief marketing officer for what we were trying to do. What's the result? You want to make your business leader the star. Don't forget that, because sometimes HR is worried about looking good. Really make the business leader the star, and they'll make sure to take care of you. So Joe gets kind of famous. Well, and I mean that seriously. I don't know if you saw last week's CFO magazine, but Joe was featured in it. CFO magazine is really important to us because our clients in the middle market, small to medium-sized enterprises, often don't have a dedicated risk buyer. So we sell to the CFO, not a risk manager, and this is where our growth area is. So here we have our brand. In fact, a professor said many companies should emulate what Marsh has done. Using internal people to convey the message is a big plus. So that article's online right now, and we'll send that out on Twitter later. Another thing we've done is we've taken internal meetings that used to be rather black box, and if you think of our Ignite operating principles, inclusive is a big one of our operating principles, as well as in touch. How do you bring more people into those in a way that's sustainable from a cost perspective and an environmental perspective and gets more people aligned with the strategy? So we had our EMEA sales meeting. In fact, we had in the Netherlands that we shared on MarshU, lots of video blogs, lots of Sparks, which is like tweeting, as well as our strategy meeting for the whole firm with our new CEO we shared. And again, finding that itch to scratch, our CEO wanted to get questions from the 170 people in the room in London. And we said, well, what do you think, Peter, if we had people spark their questions? And he said, well, I'm open to that. Well, within 12 hours, we'd sent out kind of an email to everyone. We had like 105 questions from Malaysia and from Sao Paulo and from Cleveland and everywhere in between. And it really was a rich experience to get a lot of information in a very effective and efficient way. And it was, we were kind of taking the site and, you know, screenshotting it and printing these charts, you know, kind of classic kind of, you know, bring it to the executive, the charts, you know. He was like, forget that. He went right to the computer and was scrolling through them all and was all over it. Again, but it was really interesting to him because he was getting a voice way across the firm in almost a real-time fashion. Again, you know, with these things, a lot of technology, unfortunately, whether it's a website or a learning management system, talent management, mentoring systems, et cetera, you deploy it and you do a big bang release and it's kind of there and it's done. The problem is it's not done. Your organization's needs change. In fact, we do a release. We use agile development with Marsh, so we release every week. But we're always tweaking and changing and doing usability to make it better. And we'd rather have people pull for more functionality than kind of start on day one and drop a Home Depot on them and give them way too many tools. So in terms of some game changers, with adoption, if you think of adoption in these technologies, is simply your colleagues are here, you'd like them to be here. There are things in the way. Pretty simple equation, right? Take the things out of the way. Find out what they are, listen, and ask, and you know, kind of the how can I help idea. And then one of the things we found was in the way was signing in. You have to sign in. It's available from any computer in the world, but within 30 days, we'll have it be sign in free anywhere on our network. So that's going to be a big barrier. Other people said, gosh, I travel all the time. I'm on the road all the time. So we're going to make it mobile. Again, you heard that from David today about where mobile's going and how important that is. And you know, capturing those discretionary moments. Saturdays on the couch, in line at the post office, waiting for a delayed flight, waiting for a client at that restaurant, you know, waiting to pick up your kids after soccer practice in the parking lot. Those are all discretionary moments that people can often be on ESPN or on Perez Hilton or whatever else they're looking at, or they could be looking on MarshU and learning about our capabilities, developing relationships, and doing things that are strategically aligned. We're paying them the same either way. We're also going to combine our Marsh Space collaboration portals and our Inside Marsh intranet into one social, live, user-generated intranet that's going to be really, really compelling. Now, one of the things that you will, I'm certain, encounter if you take this journey yourself is the knowledge police. We had an expert directory at our company. 500 people were anointed experts, and we had 23,500 boobs or goofballs or something. I don't know what they were, but they were not experts, apparently. In fact, everyone's got some expertise. That's kind of counter to at Marsh, everyone's a teacher. But people were very concerned that only certain people should blog, or certain people at a certain rank or level. We didn't buy into that, but what we have created, and that Christina is helping to roll out, is our certified blogger program. And there's, with social media, there's kind of what I call the stupid path, which is, let's write a social media policy and post it and pray that everyone complies. Or there's the smart path, which is let's lean in and teach people, if an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure, let's teach people how to leverage these in smart ways, and let's leverage them for the business to help grow the company. Because clearly, this is where the world's going and the economy's going, and just banning it or saying don't use it is probably not a good long-term strategy. So what we're teaching our colleagues are things that impact Salesforce effectiveness, they reduce our errors and emissions and our risk profile, and our effectiveness in RFPs through reader-centric writing, managing your digital reputation. I mean, how many companies are teaching colleagues about their digital reputation in the sales process? You leave a voicemail, you talk to an assistant, a gatekeeper, they're probably going to Google you. If there's nothing there, that's not good. If there's bad things, that's worse. So we talk about digital reputation. And it's all delivered online, on blogs, and it's action learning. You actually create a portfolio of blogs. And we make it fun. You give you a badge, a good housekeeping seal of approval, and then you're certified. Actually, right now, again, adoption barrier. Having people learn the back end of WordPress, which is a pretty cool blogging platform that we use that's open source, was cumbersome for a lot of our colleagues. They said, we don't want another system. And I said, okay, great. If you can email, you can blog. Just write up your blog in a Word document and email it to us, and we'll post it. In fact, we still post all of our blogs for our colleagues today, a very high-touch service model. So I want to give you guys a sneak peek at a quick video that's actually around Ignite and our culture. And we wanted to really, a part of our Ignite strategy with culture and engagement for 2012 is lead with Ignite, develop by Ignite, recognize with Ignite, and inspire by Ignite. So this is part of the inspire piece. So let's roll the video.
This is you. In touch. This is your journey. Choose your path, as there will be many paths to choose from. Be alert. For there is darkness on the horizon, and only the genuine will see through the night. Be nimble and rise up. Can you feel the wind? That wind of change. Be inclusive. See it. As sure as the sunrise, there is great power in your promise. Be engaged every day. Seize the opportunity. Your journey is our journey. Your vision is our vision.
Not bad for an insurance broker, huh? So Christian helped, was one of our lead producers. We learned a lot about animation. That's 30 frames per second. It's pretty cool, actually, making something animated. But the reason I show that is that it's really important to be, I think, to play big. Oftentimes, I think changes that come out of HR are very incremental, and they're kind of not very sexy or marketed very well. We believe in really showing colleagues and leaders that things are definitely changing in a step-level, game-changing, magnitudinal kind of way. And so producing pieces like that to talk about our culture that are inspiring show that that's very different than what we've typically done as a company and versus what many companies do. So that's how we like to think about it. But what I want to close out with is talking about your journey and talking about what you might do at your firm. And I think that, I don't know if any of you ever were read when you were a kid Berenstain Bears books or been parents and read these to your kids. Anyone Berenstain Bears fans here? Great books, and actually a lot we can learn from those books about how to educate and inspire with a really clear message. And I like this Blaze a Trail title here, but actually last week Jan Berenstein died. I don't know if anyone read, but 88 years old, Mrs. Berenstein died, but left a huge legacy. And I want you to think about blazing a trail at your firm. And I always like the quote, if it's going to be, it's up to me. There is no, social learning and social businesses and enterprise collaboration doesn't fit neatly within any department. It's got marketing implications and communications implications and leadership implications. And HR can be that integrator across those 5 columns. And this is probably the most compelling opportunity we've had as a function, maybe ever, to step up and really help transform our businesses. 10 key points to leave you with. First, find an itch to scratch. Don't lead with an HR tactic or an HR program. Come and find what's the thing that's driving you nuts at your company. One of the things at our company was phone numbers and email addresses. There wasn't one clear directory, or getting people's pictures. People just wanted to know, gosh, if I run into somebody in the hallway when I'm visiting, what does that person look like? Super simple problem, but high value to solving it. Number 2, make learning a covert operation. Don't tell people that they're learning. Make it so fun that, it's kind of like, you're managing, raising kids. Managing kids, you can think of a corporate guy. You're managing your children. And so, make it covert rather than overt. I get on Facebook, and I don't think that I'm learning, but I am. I needed to get some new luggage, and I asked my friends what to get, and there's like this war between Tumi and Victorionics and Samsonite. But I actually learned a lot about how people use and buy bags, and it was a very micro example, but make it covert. Go where there's energy. When these things are nascent and new, don't go with the Debbie Downers of your firm that are just negative, disengaged people. Forget them. Try to get them, you try to either get them engaged or get them fired, one of the two. But don't worry about them, okay? Find the people that are the hands up, the excited, the people that have been waiting. Maybe they've been at the firm for 30 years and they've just been waiting for their opportunity. Maybe they've been there 30 days or they're 23 years old. It doesn't matter. Find the people that are excited and they're going to be forgiving and they're going to help you out and they're going to be engaged. Create an engagement sync aligned with your strategy. One of the big problems with colleague engagement is that people talk about it, and it's simply discretionary effort above and beyond meets requirements of a job. But that discretionary effort is capacity, right? David talked about it this morning. If the sales guy gets all that capacity, he's not going to tell the CEO. Well, what are you going to do with that capacity? Does it turn into bake sales and water cooler conversations and filing papers, or do you align it to an activity that's strategic? You have that capacity, capture, it's like a carbon sink captures carbon, capture engagement somehow in something that's strategically aligned. Number 5, burn off organizational fog, or create a hub for spokes. You saw lots of diagrams from speakers this morning along the same concept. There's so much out there. There's so many things with your colleagues that you can leverage. So create that hub for spokes by burning off organizational fogs. Think of it as a metal detector for organizational gems. Those gems could be resources, knowledge, network, connections, experiences. Number 6, cut the HR crap. Let's talk business, okay? Don't lead with HR speak to business leaders. Speak into their listening. Speak to something that's going to get their attention. If I walked in and talked about a talent strategy or about something around engagement or retention, I might get, a little excitement. If I said, hey, I'd like to talk about growth, it'd be like, come right in. So that's the sort of thing that you really want to lead with a business conversation. Make it easy and make it fun. Super, super important. If it's hard, people are going to give up. If it's a new behavior, they're already busy. They already have a ton on their plate. So make it super simple, super easy, and make it fun. And additionally, design a game and keep score. A lot of the things around the data and the competition and the measurement, really important. Everything in business we keep measurements on, and why not this? And actually make it fun. Declare winners, give prizes, give a lot of upside. Rather than kind of spend all your attention with a stick on the people that aren't doing it, spend all your attention and put the spotlight on the folks that are doing it and make them the stars. Number 9, treat associates or colleagues or employees like customers. Many of our companies that are represented here at this conference have world-class client service or customer service. We know exactly what to do to make customers and clients really, really happy. But for some reason within our firms, we lose that entire capability and treat our own people very differently than we would treat clients or customers. We often know how to do it. Be nice to them. Be responsive. Be available. Help them out. Hold their hand. It's a high-touch service model. We have actually a CRM that we use for our own colleagues, and we measure things. Joe, you heard about, who the CFO magazine thing, he didn't get there on his own. He had people on my team in the background following up, and Joe would say, I'll have that blog done by Friday. Guess what? It'd be in the CRM. They'd get an alert. You call him on Friday, and Joe would go, ugh. And he said, Ben, they were so nice, I couldn't say no. And that's exactly what happened. And number 10, remember at your firm, everyone is a teacher. So I think we're out of time for today, but I'd like you to get social on the break, and I'd love to hear from you afterwards. But thanks for your time today. I appreciate it.